Next up is a conversation about unionization and New Jersey's news ecosystem. We've seen a handful of new unions pop up in our state over the last 2 years. And so to give us more context and look ahead, we're going to dive into this topic now. So I'd like to welcome our colleague. He's coming out from behind the curtain onto the front of the stage, Joe Amdinas, who's going to moderate the discussion. So with that, I will hand it over to Joe and our panel.
All right. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I appreciate it. Just so everybody knows, I am going to be running the tech and this panel at the same time. So I would ask our audience to please bear with me. And right now, I'm just bringing all our speakers on stage. We're waiting for Jack. So we have Melanie, Suzanne, and Jack with us here. We're going to be talking about unionization in newsrooms across New Jersey over the last year or so, particularly in the broader context of the unionization, I'd say, wave that's been happening, at least recently. Very encouraging and inspiring stuff going on throughout the country and especially in New Jersey. Before we get into things, let's start off with a little introductions. First of all, my name is Joe Amdinas. I am the Assistant Director here at the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State. I've been working with and for and on behalf of news organizations of all sizes and shapes in New Jersey for the last 8 years now with the center. And then before that, started my own little digital news organization outside of New Brunswick there. But I've been fascinated by this topic for as long as I've been interested in media, just the idea of collective power, collective bargaining, and of course, something that the center supports, collaborative power and decision making here. So I'd love for you all to give brief introductions, introduce yourself to our audience here. Tell us about your role in your newsroom and in your union. And after that, we'll go into a little bit of the nitty gritty timeline stuff. So you want to start with Melanie?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. So I'm Melanie Anziday. I'm a reporter at The Record newspaper, which is also NorthJersey.com and part of the larger USA Today network at Gannett. I've been at The Record since June 2014. Over my time, I've started out on the business desk when we had one. I was also on the local beat where I covered different towns like Paramus and Hackensack, and then I moved to business where I covered retail again. And now I cover an enterprise sports beat, which runs a gamut. Usually find myself covering women's sports, youth sports, anything like that. And as far as the union, I am the Record Guild unit secretary. So that's a little bit about me.
Fantastic. Suzanne, do you want to go next? All right.
Sure. So I'm Suzanne Cervenka. I've been with Gannett since January 2007 at one of our sites in Florida. I came up to New Jersey actually helping out with Superstorm Sandy, and then moved here full time January 2013. I've worked on some of our investigations. I cover local government and also just kind of filled in wherever the holes have been. With the APP MCJ Guild, I'm our unit chair. Leading our new union.
Fantastic. And finally, last but not least, Jack, go ahead.
Hey, I'm Jack McLuhan. I'm a producer with the Atlantic Dot, which is our digital optimization team. So it's the way I always like to explain it is I make sure that people read the good work that reporters like Melanie and Suzanne do. It's headline optimization, that kind of stuff. I started actually at the Asbury Park Press in September 2019. A little over a year later, they took us out of our newsrooms and they created these, regional departments. So that's where I started doing everything for every site in New Jersey. I'm working with colleagues doing the same in New York and also Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware. With the Atlantic Dot Guild, I'm our unit chair as well, and also had helped organize in Asbury prior to my removal to our regional structure.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for all that. Before we dive in, I just want to give a little bit of perspective here. I mean, I have articles here. Let me see if this will work. I want to just throw this up real quick. There's 3-pointer articles that I was looking at in, preparation for this, and you all won't be able to read these, but I can post them in the chat. And it just talks about the massive wave. They don't even call it a wave, but a movement of journalists who are unionizing across the United States in record numbers, I might add. Here, I'll drop that article in the chat. Here. And it says that in the past year, and this is from July of this year, in the past decade, workers at news publications have launched more than 200 union drives, and over 90% of them have been successful. You hear a lot about unionization efforts at places like Amazon. The recent vote that Amazon that was unsuccessful. There's a lot of union busting tactics that we don't have to get into there. But for whatever reason, you tend to hear a lot more about the unsuccessful ones. I feel like, at least in recent headlines. But there has been in the last year alone 37 union drives where journalists asked formally for union representation, and every single one of them was successful. Now, if you look here, back in February, the Record Guild was formed when the Bergen Record, Daily Record, and NJ Herald came together. 68 staff members across 3 papers signed it, especially amidst the actions by the company, by Gannett, which is laid off, shedding more than 500 jobs over the last year. Here it says since 2016, more than 250 people at 3 New Jersey papers have been laid off. Talk to me a little bit about the circumstances of your unionization votes. We'll start with Jack, and tell us a little bit about the circumstances surrounding this process, and what was going on in your world, in your newsroom, and how this started to unfold.
Yeah, I mean, I was somebody who came to it. That job in 2019, that was my first job out of college. But I think at that point, getting into journalism, you were very aware that it was a very turbulent, more so than usual, I think, workplace at the time, and people getting laid off all the time. Like, you said you read all those numbers. I mean, it's not a great place to be. So I knew kind of coming in, but wasn't doing anything formal about it. I was just showing up. And then, but I know, especially Suzanne and Melanie, who have been in these newsrooms for longer than I have, obviously, like, witnessed these things happen. I don't know if either you were dodged layoffs or whatever it was, but for the dot specifically, like I mentioned, we were pulled out of our newsrooms and regionalized, and this was in the fall of last year, in the middle of the pandemic. We had to reapply for our own jobs back, and again, like without a promise of having one if we somehow didn't get it or whatever it was. And I think the undercurrent for all of us was just being very frustrated with the lack of dignity. We did not have any say in our employment. We had no say in the direction of where we were going. And we're made to feel like we were cogs more than we were people or, valued employees. We were pulled into this different structure without any sort of input. And if we had been able to provide some input, it would have gone a lot more smoothly than it has and continues to. But yeah, I think that was like the main thing for a lot of us. It's just been frustrated even for me, like obviously not working in journalism super long, but was already frustrated within 6 months or whatever it was when I first got that call. I'm sure Melanie and Suzanne have much deeper experiences being frustrated. I know they do.
Well, I want to go to Suzanne because I want to read a statement or read a quote from the statement when the Record Guild started. I'm sorry, the APP, MCJ, sorry. It says, quote, "We have unionized to advocate for ourselves and to support each other, to fight for fairness and equity, and demand that Gannett treat us with the dignity we deserve." Adding, "There is no local news without local journalists. We have unionized to preserve our high-quality local news coverage and to build a better, more stable future." Suzanne, can you talk a little bit about where that statement came from, how it came about, what was the context in which you all were working towards this, and the same question to Jack, or that I gave to Jack. Talk about the circumstances out of which this grew.
So where Jack was talking a little bit about, he hasn't really been around quite so much to dodge layoffs. I started with Gannett when it was, I remember my coworker joked, "Yeah, you can't get fired by Gannett. You can't get fired." And I've just left and right in I started 2 years into journalism working with Gannett. Almost 15 years later, I have been dodging layoffs left and right. Jack talked about reapplying for his jobs. I think I've had to reapply for my own job with Gannett at least twice. It may have been 3 times, but at least twice. I've watched 2 sets of newsrooms when I was in Florida, just a newsroom just be decimated. And then to come to New Jersey thinking that like, okay, things are going to be stable. And then to watch that newsroom be decimated. And I've watched just how all of those cuts have impacted the amount and quality of journalism we can do. Look, we work really, really hard to do the best journalism we can, but there's only so many people can do. Well, there's only so much one person can do. I want to say like our staff is probably like a tenth of what it was when I started in 2007. So that's where that kind of quote came from. Like we need to have that staff. We need to make sure that our community. I mean, our newsroom is representing our community, both, in the knowledge base, the historical knowledge base that's there, and then just also the diversity that's there. Our newsroom should match that diversity that's in our communities. So that's some of the reasons of how we came to look to unionize.
Melanie, I want to piggyback a little bit off, or veggie back, I think is what our friend Britt Harley says, and I love that. I want to veggie back off of what Suzanne was just saying, because in the statement from the Record Guild, I'll read a quote real quick. With increasing workloads and dwindling resources dedicated to local news, Gannett expects the staff will continue to accomplish more with less, adding, all of this leads to a newsroom that's constantly bleeding talent and struggling to effectively report on the news that matters. And in fact, the Point article notes that the union also said that the newsrooms have lost an alarming, which they put, quote, alarming number of journalists of color. Talk about that context here. Talk about that circumstance and the loss, I don't know if brain drain is the right word, but specifically in areas where staff are already, staff of color are already dwindling and almost non-existent across New Jersey media and newsrooms across the country, to be honest, in U.S. journalism. Talk about how what role that played in the unionization process for the Record Guild.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess just a quick backtrack. So I've been at the Record since 2014, and then we got bought by Gannett in 2016. So I have a very unique experience in the sense that I know before Gannett and after Gannett, and I know I've kind of watched as my specific newsroom, the local newspaper that I grew up reading, watching the high school scores, doing all those things, went from having a really bustling newsroom with not only junior level reporters and veteran reporters, but that mid level that we've kind of seen disappear in the industry over time. And specifically when it comes to journalists of color, I know we've just watched as my colleagues, specifically Latino and Latinx and Latina journalists, kind of, frustrated at maybe not having the resources or guidance or assistance to do certain things, kind of go up and just get different jobs. And historically, that's something that's happening in the industry for a long time. But specifically with the acceleration of the downsizing in our newsroom, that kind of accelerated that as well. So we feel that through a union, we can have our voices heard. Like just a very specific example is we used to have a journalist or an editor of color, for example, but now we don't have any of that. And that's just a very specific example of simple ways that we feel that as a union, we can push for better resources, better investments by the company that will lead to better journalism, because you have editors that reflect the communities you serve, that will have the wherewithal to guide other younger journalists of color who might need guidance to kind of do, the nuances that you can't find unless you have that diversity in the ranks. So
certainly not an issue that's unique to Gannett newsrooms either. I'm sure all of us remember Tennyson Donier's story coming out of NJ Advance. Certainly, again, not a unique story in terms of the lack of journalists and editors and reporters of color across the news industry, as we just discussed. What, if anything, and this is a general question to all three of you, I'll start with Jack. What, if anything, has changed in those departments since unionization? I know it's been very soon. It was very recent. So, with that in mind, what kind of motions or movements have any of you seen, if any, to sort of rectify or at least mitigate some of the damages or push back against that at all? Jack, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Suzanne and then Melanie after that.
Well, yeah, I would say, for one thing, a lot of it is there's been a much larger sense of community, I think, amongst individuals, on a very broader level. Talking specifically about our situation with the DOT, we're also fully remote. That was the other part of us being taken out of newsrooms. Those of us that were working in newsrooms will now not have a newsroom to go back to ever. And we've got people very spread out because it is a remote job. We have 2 coworkers in Arizona and all these people that we never really met. And all of a sudden, I'm on the phone with these people every other day, whatever it is. So on the very base level, I now have new friends, which is nice. I think that something kind of gets lost in the unions are here to fight and stuff but also you get to meet some new people, and that's pretty cool. I became friends with, including with organizing with Asbury, and even now we're doing larger stuff with the Record and all that kind of stuff. I'm much closer to all these people than I was beforehand. But in terms of tangible stuff, When you are a certified union, you enter into what's called status quo. They can't make any sort of unilateral changes to your employment, which stretches from, they have to prove like in a really strong way if they want to fire somebody or lay somebody off that they're doing it for a very specific reason. There's a lot of, proof that has to be shown there, down to, they can't shuffle you around your schedule without asking you. I mean, so we've gotten some protections out of that. Melanie or Suzanne would know better than I whether I can talk about the specific one that just happened. But, we've gotten some wins out of that already, which has been really great to see without us having, a contract yet. This is all, we're getting ready to start bargaining. We just asked for some bargaining dates the other day. But the stuff you can get without even having a formal contract yet, and so much more protection that you don't have beforehand, in and of itself, I think gives a lot of people some peace of mind.
Suzanne, same question. What kind of progress or at least movement have you seen towards a healthier, better direction, especially when it comes to restoring the balance and representation in newsrooms?
Yeah, so that's the one with APP MCJ. We're the newest of the
right.
Of our four. We have a sister union in New York that we all partner with. So we are 3 weeks old, but again, status quo. We just recently had.
You haven't fixed the problem yet. You're 3 weeks. Come on.
But I think there is just a lot more of conversations among reporters, both within our newsroom. We're two sites. We're Asbury Park Press and My Central Jersey, and those two papers have always been Gannett, but we have so much broader conversations. And there's so much more camaraderie there that we feel like we can have better communications, which lends to better reporting because, you're talking with someone else and you have a friendly relationship with them. And then also we have we're more comfortable just saying look, X happened and, X happened on the job. We're really frustrated about it. And, what can we do? And before those conversations were more shucks, yeah, that's terrible. But now we actually have a power of okay, well, maybe let's brainstorm. What would we like to see happen? We have one that just is still just literally just popped up. So I don't know if I can talk about the details of it. But we're talking and saying okay, what would we like to see happen? Let's come up with a solution and then we can, let's try to present the solution. Can we come up with a solution among ourselves? And then can we present that to the bosses to say, hey, not only do we know what this is the problem, but here's the solution. So that's some of that. I mean, and again, we're really looking forward to starting to bargain.
I love this because, I'm a student of the house that Craig built over at CUNY, the Newmark J School, and they're big on community engagement. They're huge on that, social journalism, community engaged journalism, and I love it because I think it's empowering to communities. It hands the mic over, if you will. But the thing that I think is missing from that school of thought of listening is great. You listen, it's great, but you can listen all you want, but if there's no obligation to follow through or to turn the levers of power, then you can have a situation that happens like with The Correspondent, where they did all the community engagement and listening in the world, and then it was two Dutch guys, in a room deciding that, hey, we're going to change the entire trajectory of the thing. So I love that. I appreciate that, and that's one of the things I think is so powerful that people tend to forget about unions. Is it's not just a voice in the room; it's actually a vote in the room in many ways. So I do appreciate that. I don't want to leave Melanie out though. Melanie, same question. What kind of progress or motions or movement have you seen at your at the Record Guild in terms of shifting the balance of and the representation in the newsroom of journalists of color?
Yeah. Well, I think kind of summarizing what already has been said, but there's just more transparency. There's more communications between reporters, producers, photographers. We all just, whenever we have a problem, we go to each other and find a collective solution and try to find that. And that's an avenue that we didn't have before. And even Jack mentioned, even without a contract, there is that status quo. So there is some sense of protection there. There's a very specific example that came to mind. There was a reporter, and this is out of the Asbury Park newsroom. We have a regional group chat of, diversity, equity, inclusion, and the efforts that we talk about behind the scenes of things that we see. So there was a reporter who who is of the Jewish faith, and she realized that there was a situation where there was a celebratory pizza party for the newsroom reaching a milestone, and it was on Yom Kippur that they scheduled this. So, a very specific example of something where if you had more diversity in the ranks, something like this would never have happened. So collectively, we were there to support, even through the record. We were all working across the region to figure out a way. So, a little quick Twitter campaign, you can go on Twitter and see the tweets. And then, management reversed it. And it seems like a very small thing, but it's not. And that's just one example of something that we can talk about. I know there's a lot of things we can't talk about the changes that we want to do, but that's something that was on Twitter. It was on social media. It was talked about, I'm sure, in Asbury in a more micro level. But we're already seeing wins, and it's nice to have that power and that hope that we can actually have meaningful change.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, at least two of you have mentioned contracts, or at least contract negotiations. And I don't know, especially as somebody who I've never been in a newsroom union myself. And in fact, I've actually never been in a union, even as when I was a forklift driver or a warehouse operator or a truck driver, done all those jobs, but I was never fortunate enough to be able to join a union. Didn't know much about them when I was young. And I've only come to learn more about them as after, in college and after that. And one thing that I think people don't understand is just how sinister I think contract negotiations can get. I'm not going to ask you all to comment or to talk about negotiations, but I was wondering if we could talk just a little bit about one example. It's something called a two-tier contract. It's a very famous or infamous tactic that's used where the company will offer it as a consolation or some kind of concession that the people who are currently at the organization or at the company will get a certain level of their demands met, but that anybody who joins after them will not get that. And I'm wondering if you can, if you can't, don't worry, we'll move on. Again, I don't want to taint any negotiations, but I wonder if those kind of things have come up, or if that's something that you're dealing with in any of your negotiations that you're able to talk about. Because again, that's something I'd never even heard of, and apparently it dates back a couple decades. So can anybody talk to that? I mean, it's open floor.
I can slightly, and I guess I've seen it in things that I've covered, in covering business where they do that. And I guess Gannett has already been, I started with Gannett when, in Florida, it was a much cheaper cost of living, and that's just a cheaper cost of living in Florida than obviously New Jersey. And so I started at one wage, and I built up. I mean, there weren't a lot of raises over the 15 years, but when they were, and then moving across the country and negotiating that there, one of the things that I saw, and especially was eye-opening to me in our organizing campaign, is that there's some reporters or some of our newsroom staff that are starting off at wages that they're starting off at the salary that I started off at in 2007 in Florida. And it's just, I can't support it. I mean, and that's part of the fight. Like, I mean, yeah, it's, you organize to get some benefits for yourself, but we have to be able to make sure that journalism is sustainable into the future. And starting off journalists at wages where they can't afford an apartment in New Jersey, that's not something I can personally, just Suzanne Cervenka speaking, I can't support that, because you just have to be able to, we're not going to have journalists if they can't afford to pay their rent, or if they eventually want to pay their mortgage, if they can't afford to buy groceries or pay the electric bill. So, I mean, we're fighting for all of us, but we're also fighting for the future.
Thank you. Yeah, I just imagine that that's an incredible point of tension, because it is very tempting, especially I assume when you work so hard, you grind for this just to eke out a deal, and then they dangle some kind of, well, you can take all this progress that you've made, but it only comes if you, neglect the generations coming forward or after you. And so I imagine that that's a tough thing to negotiate or navigate among your coworkers, and it might be an easy wedge to drive them apart, especially those who are particularly struggling and need that win. And don't have the luxury of waiting for a better deal. I imagine that can be pretty tough. I just want to throw to Jack or Melanie if you want to add anything to that, because I was going to move on after this, but any other thoughts?
I will just say that the benefit of having a union now is that we're not as strong as we are being together between different newsrooms in the region, working together and getting towards that first contract, which would be huge. Like Suzanne has said, to create that stability in the local communities for journalism there. But it's also valuable that we do have the guilds to help us in terms of providing those resources that otherwise we wouldn't have. So lawyers, people that know all of this stuff that we just aren't aware of, and that's incredibly valuable. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Before we move on, I just want to encourage everybody who is listening in right now or watching to drop some Q&A in the Q&A feature here. Drop your questions here. I know I've been spamming the chat with a bunch of links that I hoarded in preparation for this panel. I was very excited. So I encourage you to check out all of those. I've been trying to pull out relevant quotes and statistics and studies. I just want to show one more. While I'm doing this, I want everybody to go to the Q&A feature and drop any questions you have for our panelists. I just want to show, I'm going to screen share real quick. I want to show this awesome digital media unionization timeline from culturalworkersorganized.org. I assume you all can see this now. This is so cool. As somebody who's literally in charge of products and events here for the center, I'm going to steal this style here, but I urge you to just click on this link here that I'm going to drop in the chat right now and scroll down and look just how many newsroom unionization efforts have gone on over the last decade or so, or last 5 years or so. And the Gannett unions are mentioned in here when we get all the way down to 2021. I just want to really urge everybody to take a look at this amazing timeline and just see how much movement there is around. I mean, you hear about the John Deere strikes, about IATSE going on right now, I assume, but it's also going on in journalism. It's going on in newsrooms across the country. It's picking up speed. People are sick and tired of being sick and tired at work. And it's manifesting here in the flesh in New Jersey and across the country. So take a look at this, because this will give you a really good, this will give you a decent understanding of just the scope of this, of the activity and the movement around these issues here. I'm still going, and I'm not even come to the New Jersey newsrooms yet. Nope. It's a picture of you all. That's why I'm stopping every time here. But as we go through here, I want to pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about some of what's going forward, what's next, what's happening. I know we just talked about the contract negotiations are underway, or at least starting to bud. What are your hopes for this process? Individual. We'll start with Jack, and then we'll go to Melanie and Suzanne. What are your hopes? What was the best case scenario? What does a successful unionization drive, or at least an aftermath of this drive? What does the success look like for you all? And what are some of the challenges you think or obstacles that you think you might encounter that you're preparing for? Again, don't want to give away any strategy or whatever, but with your best judgment here, what do you see as your North Star here, and what are you hoping for?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the stuff that we're fighting for is not a secret. I think it's very open. I think it's true with every newsroom. Obviously it's stuff with fair wages and stuff. Specifically with us again in the dot is we went from working for 2 or 3 newsrooms at most for a lot of us to I now work for 8. I cover 8 papers in New Jersey, 2 of which are 2 of Gannett's highest performing sites in the country. They're considered tier 1 sites, and I did not get a raise to accompany the fact that I'm doing 5 times the work at minimum. So I think that's a very obvious thing for a lot of people. People want better healthcare. They want we're obviously the first thing's going to be we want just cause, all these different things that are very standard in all these contracts. But on the broader scale of these things, I think people want to be able to have a say in their employment. I know we keep saying it all the time, but I think that's just such a common current through all of this, is that we're sick of not having any say in what's going on. The thing we tell people all the time is people you'll hear like, oh, why should I do this? Like, we might not change anything or whatever. Like, the only way it could change right now is it stays the same or it gets worse. by us taking a leap. Really, it's a scary thing to do. You're theoretically inviting bosses to look at you differently or whatever it is. Being afraid of retaliation on that front. But as of right now, they can do whatever they want to you right now. And now that we're certified and fighting for kind of over that, we're going to start working towards this contract. And to that point of fears and stuff, I know specifically with the dot again, we faced a pretty hardcore anti-union fight in between us going public and our certification vote. We had a lot of people getting one-on-one phone calls where they would trot out the same tired, anti-union talking points. We knew they were coming, so much so that we had bingo cards made up. And we had people winning double, triple bingo on these cards because they trot out the same things. But if you're maybe not super hardcore about it, it can scare you, and it scared some people. And we don't blame anybody. It's a scary thing to go stand up, even if it's like a smaller local shop, already kind of unnerving. But now you're doing this against the largest local newspaper chain in the country. Like, yeah, don't blame anybody who's concerned about what that reaction is. But we kind of buckled down and we're ready to be. This is a scary thing, but it's a worthwhile thing. It's a worthwhile risk, and we're confident that by standing together and collecting all of us under one umbrella and working with one another, we can win everything that we want and deserve. Really, it's almost less about what we want and it's just what we deserve. We've been mistreated for so long. I mean, I'm saying so long. I've worked in journalism for 2+ years, and even then, I've been pulled out of a newsroom already. It doesn't take very long for you to come to terms with the fact that you're not being treated correctly in this industry. But it's a worthwhile one. I know Suzanne and Melanie have touched on how important local news is, and news in general. And nobody can afford for us to be treated this way. Not the workers, not the people we work for. In terms of the public, not our bosses. Our bosses can afford to give us more money. That one is 100% true. We will talk about that as long and as often as you would like. Gannett makes a ton of money. They love to talk about how much money they make. They don't love to talk about how little they pay us.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well said. Melanie, you wanna chime in?
Yeah. So I guess the immediate, or the bare minimum that we would love to see is, a living wage for reporters, job security in a first contract, security, so you're not worrying whether or not you're going to get laid off, or if that happens, you have the support to get the best kind of severance or what have you to move on. So that's the bare minimum, to have a contract and stability and a living wage. I think the long-term goal for me, what I'm incredibly passionate about, is supporting ways to improve diversity, equity, inclusion in newspapers. So if we can find a way to get management to agree to certain concrete terms on paper, with terms of diversity goals, with timelines and things like that, that would be the best outcome in my eyes. If you do some research nationally, Gannett has refused to do that in a lot of instances. So maybe we can be the first, who knows? So something like that would be great. And yeah, I think collectively, if we can do this and we can create that stability in our newsrooms in our region, then we can just push for better journalism. So reporters can just focus on their day-to-day, on creating sources, on being engaged with communities, on doing their jobs, which is what we should be focused on, not all of this, even though we're all really excited to be doing this now. So I think that's the gist of what I have to say.
It would be nice if you could worry less about having to secure your own financial stability and dignity, and work with, maybe focus on covering and serving the communities that you're involved in. Wouldn't that be great? Yeah, thank you so much. I do want to go to Q&A now. I see one question in the chat here. Did I just skip? No, right? Melanie, Suzanne, you're good? Okay, I want to go to Q&A. Simon Galper wants to know, how can readers and community members support unionization? And how can unions lead to more engaged journalism? Simon is also a student of the house that Craig built, so I'm sure he's eager to hear about engaged journalism. And again, I encourage everybody to drop your questions in the chat for our panelists. We have about 10 minutes left to go, so I want to get to as many as possible. But anybody can take that one. Go ahead. What can community members support unionization efforts at newsrooms?
Well, some of them is just, let Gannett corporate management, the leaders of our sites know that you support a unionized newsroom. We had a number of people through our organizing campaign send emails to our editors, to Mike Reed, who's Gannett's CEO, to let them know that you support the unionized newsrooms. The News Guild's our research has shown that the unionized newsrooms have fewer gaps or less smaller gaps in pay equity between for women and racial pay equity. It's, and those are all so important to have, because if everyone has a different experience, everyone has a different background. And when you have that background,
it's just the sound of a union. That's the sound of union work happening in the background right there.
The
ping of a hammer. The ping of a hammer. There we go.
Mom, who was also a union member. That's the sound of my mom, who was also a union member.
Moms are definitely a force for good in the unionization movement. I can attest to that. Continue. Sorry.
I guess so. That's great. So speak up. Let them know. We have our APP MCJ Guild is our Twitter handle. Retweet us. Tweet at Mike Reed. Tweet at our editors. Let them know that you support a unionized newsroom.
Yeah. Jack, Melanie, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I would also say, I don't think there are times when it comes up, and like obviously we're far away from any of that stuff, but you'll hear like, oh, you guys are thinking about going on strike. Should I end my subscription? And we would generally say no. Continue to support your local news. Like, that is also all of our livelihoods at the end of the day as well. You can prove that we are, quote unquote worth it. We know we're worth it, but subscribing and supporting your local news in and of itself also supports us, because it just continues to show them that we're valuable to our communities. I know the Record and Asbury Park Press in the last month and change have hit pretty significant milestones in terms of subscribers, which cool, Gannett gets more money, but more so for us, looking at it from our angles, these are people who care about the work that we do. And these are the people that we're helping, and these are the people that we're underserving to some degree, because we are not adequately staffed or paid or anything like that.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough because on the one hand, readers, at least in organizations or newsrooms that aren't cooperatively owned and governed, only really have one lever to pull, and if they even are subscribers. And then at the same time, it sucks because then you can already hear it like, hey, look, subscriptions are down, we can't give you more money because So I mean, there's a whole other conversation hopefully for the next local news summit about cooperatively owned worker owned organizations that I'd love to have with all of you. Melanie, anything you want to add to how community members and readers can support unionization efforts?
Yeah, I would say reach out to our bosses, tweet, email, call, do all the things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In very polite and kind ways. Let them know that you support journalists and you support their reporters and you support the reporting. If you email a journalist or reporter, I'm sure I can speak for Suzanne and Jack in this situation. If we get an email from someone with a genuine concern, we will respond. We will look into it. We will do those things. So if you reach out to our bosses and let them know, we support a unionized newsroom, we want to see these things. Or, if you've been a longtime reader, remind them of the things that we had a year ago or 2 years ago and tell them you want it back. That's how we can prove our worth in a way, even though we know we're worth a lot more than what we've been getting over the past few years, but it all helps us and in our fight to, get these contracts, get these, just make journalism better.
Thank you. We are at 8 or 7 minutes left, but I just want to remind our panelists, actually, you are able to answer some of the Q&As by typing out the answers. I'm going to do a quick combination here. We have an anonymous question. Are you all in contract negotiations currently? And Josie wants to know, have you included the right to strike? So I'll let real quick, just rapid fire. Then when I want to get to these last two questions, one from Rebecca and then one from Josie. And then of course, if you have time, I'd hope you can indulge Simon in the chat. He wants to talk about the second half of his question. But let's start with, are you all in contract negotiations currently? And have you included the right to strike? Whichever order. We'll start with Suzanne.
Hi. So we are just at the beginning of our contract negotiations. So with the right to strike situation,
another union warrior in the backgroround. I hear. Yeah.
With the right to strike, that is that's not something that we are saying right now. I mean, I guess we're really excited to join Gannett, see Gannett at the union table, the negotiating table. We're really, optimistic that we're going to have some really great results. Could that be something down the line? Technically there is, but we're that's, I mean,
we don't have to get into it if it's yeah.
We're really looking forward that the company will realize that we all have the same goal of, doing what we can to support local journalism.
Josie's chiming in the chat saying if the right to strike is not a central component, the union has no teeth. I'm sorry, no teeth. It's a fair point, Josie. I'm sure.
What I would say to that end is we would never take something off the table for ourselves that we would need. We are maybe not going to commit to something one way or the other, but we would never, willfully, defang ourselves. I get your point though, Josie, for sure. But yeah, no, we would not give that away.
Under federal labor law, that is an option that we have.
Okay.
We're really optimistic though that, we can come to something.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Melanie, anything real quick? We got 4 minutes.
I think they answered that pretty well.
Perfect.
I think we'll see the negotiations. Yeah.
Last 2 questions here. And again, I encourage all 3 of you to, remain in the chat during the break. I can even leave you on as panelists in silence during the break so you can continue to type out the answers to the questions. But if you have places to go, stories to cover, don't worry about it. We'll follow up and have people follow up. One thing from Rebecca Aguilar, I'm sorry, Rebecca, I hope I didn't butcher that. She says she's the president of the Society of Professional Journalists. How can established journalism organizations like SPJ or IRE, ONA, NAHJ, NABJ, et cetera, help unions improve working conditions for journalists? So how can the trade associations chime in and help?
So I know in our discussions, as far as, improving diversity, equity, and inclusion, teaming up with the specific organizations, like an NAHJ, that would be great because they have the resources and the wherewithal to provide, a pipeline to get more journalists from different backgrounds into that. So that's one way that could improve. I'm actually part of SPJ too in New Jersey, the NJSPJ. So I think as SPJ, just showing your support and saying that you support unions, because I know historically at SPJ, you try to stay out of it because you don't want to be in the middle of things. However, I don't think this is about being in the middle of it. I think it's also just about supporting better journalism. So I think just connecting with the unions and talking to them and seeing where you can help them with in terms of resources and help. So that's how I would say that.
Anybody want to add to that? We got 3 minutes. Okay.
I think pretty nailed it, yeah.
All right. Finally, Josie wants to know, when newsrooms were staffed, not fully, for that never happens, were marginalized communities being covered more and deeper? So does a more robust staff, and presumably one that is representative of those communities, I don't know if we've ever seen that necessarily, but would it follow that more fully staffed, robust newsrooms would better cover and deeper and provide deeper coverage of those communities? Is that the assumption?
I don't want to say so. Yes. Going forward, I think so, because right now in our newsroom, we have communities that don't have a reporter that cover them. Yes, because it's a myth in the past. Yes. So I don't want to say in the past we did all this wonderful stuff, but now we more reporters would mean we'd have, like, right now we have towns that we don't have reporters to cover. I'm struggling to know if we have any. There are communities in our coverage area. We don't have reporters who speak languages for some of the communities in our coverage area. So, for example, Asbury Park Press has a very large Orthodox Jewish community. It would be helpful if we had someone who might, be able to speak Hebrew. We have a very large Portuguese community and also a Haitian community. We don't have anyone that speaks Portuguese. We don't have anyone who speaks, Creole. We don't have, we don't have a strong Spanish speaking reporter right now. So those are just, if
sounds
we
like
have
an opportunity for collaboration right there. I was going to say, we got people in the chat here saying we got other resources and reporters out there who I'm sure would love to work with you all.
Yeah. So, so when we're hiring, one of the things that we want to push for is to make sure that, hey, we know people, we're all in ONA and SBJ and IRE. When you're
and
hiring,
members of the Center for Cooperative Media's News Commons as well, I would say.
exactly. but we can push for those things too. I mean, one of the things we hope for and hope the company does, that we want to do, and we hope the company does take us up on it, is to, like, bring us in on the hiring process, because we do know people. We do know, we do have these organizations we're a part of, and maybe allowing us to help you recruit will, bring in that more diverse community.
All right. I will have to leave it there. I hear the music coming in for our break. Thank you so much to our panelists. We're going to go on a 15-minute break. Suzanne, Melanie, Jack, this has been fantastic. I cannot wait to follow up with you. I hope you follow up with Simon and the folks who are in the chat. I didn't get a chance to get to your questions. I apologize. I wish this was long. I could talk about this for hours. We'll be back at 3:15. We'll see you for the rest of the local news summit. We got some great stuff. We got lightning talks. We got all kinds of great stuff coming up. So, folks, thank you again. Appreciate it. And we will see you in 15 minutes. All right.